Hello and welcome to episode 166 of Magic Rays of Light, a podcast exploring the world of Apple TV and so much more. I'm your host, Devon Dundee. I'm joined as always by my co-host, Sigmund Judge. Sigmund, Easter weekend is gone, but this week we did celebrate Earth Day. Did you have a great Earth Day?
I did. I enjoyed it by looking out into the sea this past weekend and setting the world to rights with my best friend. But I also spent a little bit of Earth Day kind of looking through some old technology, both on the home theatre front and, just technology kind of laying around, mainly sorting out old HDMI cables, old Ethernet cables, and maybe some old USB cables. It's good to have one or two still hanging around, but maybe not the bags and bags full that I currently possess. And this was all sparked by something that Apple announced this past week, which we'll talk about at the end. But yeah, I just wanted to talk about a few items that I came across that are completely useless to me these days, were great back in the past, and they're on their way to Apple. And they are two, I'm going to call them network devices when I do hand these in. But they're two devices that, before the streaming world really kind of kicked in, we needed. And that is a Sling TV, which basically allowed you to broadcast the video signal from your cable box or whatever that was plugged in to your phone over the internet. Wow. And in some ways it's still got some functionality because it was IR based and everything else, but the apps didn't get updated, and there was even a way of streaming to a Facebook app and then you could watch with your friends, which was very cool and very kind of futuristic in that sense. But yeah, the Sling TV Sling Box. So before, they got into the services game like everyone else, they had this little box. It was amazing. And before that, I was actually big into Sony PlayStation and watching TV that way because I loved the idea of merging of multimedia and gaming and that kind of thing. I had this box. It was called the Remote Play Box. And Sony did eventually release the Sony Play TV. Basically, it had a whole EPG layout. And I think it was Europe and Japan. I don't think it actually made its way to America. But it was just a really, really cool thing. And anyway, going through all of my old stuff, I came across these two boxes. I think the Remote Play box was called the LFP, and it wasn't necessarily something that was focused on PlayStation users, but more the home theatre enthusiasts. But it worked with the old PSP back in the day, and that's how I used to tune into my TV when visiting my father, then in Slovenia. And yeah, it was kind of weird to think that you needed boxes and that, I don't know, the state of television and live broadcast just wasn't prepared and ready at that time, and you needed stuff like this.
Yeah, this is a really cool throwback, and I'm amazed you still have these things lying around. My brother was a big gadget head back in the day as well, and he installed a Sling TV on our TV, and I really didn't get it at first. I was like, wait a second, why would you need to do that on your phone when you've got the TV right here? And then we'd be out somewhere and he could pull it up on his phone. I was like, oh, okay, now I get it. So that was the beginning of my kind of journey down that route. But also thinking about, like you said, back when there was a big question about how multimedia, the living room, and TV were all going to kind of meld together. And I remember my Blu-ray player that I actually still own and use today ran the same UI as the Sony PlayStation 3. It's a Sony Blu-ray player, and it has that horizontal strip of icons for, if it was a PlayStation, you could play a game, but with the Blu-ray player, you can play a disc. And it also had apps built into it for streaming. And just the early heyday of that and how far we've come and what we're talking about now. It's kind of cool to think back on that. A cool little journey down memory lane there.
Yeah, I mean, the remote play box also had the XMB, the cross media bar is what Sony called it, right? And yeah, brought back a lot of memories, along with recently checking out a repurposed PSP that was left by my stepfather. So lots and lots of great kind of ways of repurposing. I tried to find a way of repurposing the Google Chromecast audios that I had, and cannot. Of course, they've been discontinued now and they're not supported by Google, and so they had a bit of an apocalypse day earlier this year. Something I have at least started to kind of look into and research. I also came across an old AV receiver that I had. Nothing special. Something that can do 7 channels and very, very basic stuff. And I also have like some old airports lying around, the thinner version of the airports that could be then used as AirPlay 2 receivers. And well, if you can put 2 and 2 together, you're probably going to work out what I am planning to do should I be able to get hold of more of the airport hardware, Devon. On your side though, is there anything that you are looking to kind of get rid of? And, you know, are you someone like me that has bags and bags and bags of cables just for that day that probably will never come?
I am pretty vigilant about keeping things tidy, donating or selling or recycling old devices and cables. I have a single lightning cable still in my house, and
Wow.
yeah, I guess if that one goes out, I'm going to be in trouble, but that's just kind of my approach to things. I don't keep boxes. I like to keep things very neat and tidy. And so there is one device, though, that I just haven't been able to part with. I think it's an emotional connection for me.
Okay.
But it's my iPad Mini 2 that I bought when I went to graduate school. It was my device I took to class to take notes on, wrote some papers on it. It was my first real experience with the iPad for like getting things done. I had the original iPad, but that was mostly for games and watching TV shows. And so this iPad Mini, I took it everywhere with me. I took it to the gym with me to watch TV on the treadmill. And when I ended up upgrading to the iPad Pro in 2017, I kept the Mini 2 around. I was like, maybe I could do something with this someday. Maybe I could use it as a home controller, or, you know, someday when I have children, maybe I could pass it down. And it's just sat in a drawer, and now a lot of those things have kind of passed it by, right? The home architecture has moved on to the point that I don't think it can even connect to my home setup anymore.
True.
Streaming services have gone on to the point that maybe it could run some older versions of the streaming apps, but I don't even know if it could necessarily connect to those anymore. So it's just sat in a drawer for so long, and I pull it out every once in a while just to hold it and look at the form factor and look at how thin it was. And it's just such a cool device. It reminds me of some of the earlier days of the iPad when things were just progressing at such a rate that it just felt so cool to be a part of. But I really don't have any use for it. So it's just kind of sitting in a drawer taking up space at this point. And as much as it pains me, I probably should recycle it. And I think if there was ever a time to recycle it, if there was a sign that I should, I think Apple's probably given me that sign with their latest promotion.
I'm going to challenge you here, kind of in the vein of comfort zone challenge from our friends. Let's see if you can find a way of reusing this iPad Mini. A couple of ideas. Maybe airfoil will still be compatible and you can use it as some kind of receiver for vinyl or for audio tapes if you still have some of those around. I'm going to put the challenge out there and let's see what you come up with this summer. I think we've both got a summer project in line with our old stuff. You can now trade in Apple TVs, HomePods, AirPods, and more for the very first time at Apple stores, with Apple giving 10% off on accessories through May 16th when you recycle a qualifying item, which we'll have linked in the show notes exactly what those terms are. Personally, I think Apple's home devices should be accepted as trade-ins throughout the year. Hopefully, though, that changes should this promotion prove popular. And, well, from recycling and repairing our gadgets to repairing people and a broken health service, what else are we going to be talking about this week on Magic Rays of Light?
This week, we're going to recap Apple original medical drama Berlin ER. We're going to catch up on tons of release and production news that I'm really excited to talk about. But we're going to start with an interesting topic: our ideas for a next generation Siri Remote. And this discussion is inspired by our conversation last week about Google adding a free TV button to Google TV remotes, kind of how that made us reflect on the Siri Remote and how much we appreciate it. But with rumors of new Apple TV hardware potentially coming later this year, it made me wonder, what changes would we like to see in the next iteration of the Siri Remote? So we're going to share some ideas, maybe throw some things at the wall, see what sticks. And I think we've got a pretty cool list here, Sigmund. I want to start with form factor and finish, and start with less a suggestion and more just a question that I've been thinking about this week. I look at the current Siri Remote with its silver finish and the black buttons, and I love the look. I know you love the look because you've color matched so many things to it, kind of made it your aesthetic, which is awesome. But then I look at my old Siri Remote with the all black look, and I think, do I want a version of the current Siri Remote in a darker finish, maybe space gray? What do you think about that?
I think black with silver would be very cool. But I wonder how you would do that with the trackpad, how you could do that reverse. That could be interesting. If anything, though, that trackpad's probably going to get a bit dirty. But I like it. I like the fact that, there should be an option, right, for people. For me, I've kind of been reflecting on it as well during my clear out, because something that I think I've mentioned once here, but I'll mention again, people think I'm crazy. With every OS update, I keep on file an Apple TV box with its remote. And I've been doing that since tvOS was first announced. I have a lot of Siri remotes from all the different generations. What I love about the silver remote, however, is, first off, I think the trackpad would hide any kind of blemishes, and it does hold up quite well. And the silver, I love the reflections from the light from your screen onto it. It just kind of illuminates that particular product in your hand. But yeah, I guess a different color would be nice. But I think I'd probably stick with silver.
I was actually thinking black finish with black buttons like the older remotes did. I think what you lose there is maybe some contrast visually, which could be a bit of an accessibility issue. So if they did it, I think it would probably have to be a choice. And I don't know if they want to split the SKUs of the Apple TV in that way. And so that could be a cost thing as well. So I do feel like for the widest audience, probably the silver is the best. But part of me still yearns for that darker look in my own living room, just kind of with the way that I like to decorate and for things to look. But I understand why it is the way it is, and I agree with you. I think it still is a great look.
Here's my question, though. What if they only offered midnight?
Midnight. Oh, man, I'd have avoided midnight products since the color was announced. Would the Siri Remote be my first midnight product? Possibly. That would be pretty ironic, wouldn't it, Sigmund?
It would.
Ergonomically, I'm pretty happy with the size and thickness. I think it feels great. Of all the different iterations, I think it's the one that fits the best in the hand. It's got a heftiness to it that previous generations didn't, but I think it actually works in its favor. You can definitely feel it when you're holding it, and I think it works really well. What strikes me when I look at it is that giant blank space on the bottom of the remote. Now, of course, you don't want to fill it with buttons because that would just get confusing, right? But I wonder if there's a use case for that blank space. And so what I thought of was maybe a return to the iPods of old, but flipped, where you've got the wheel on top and then you've got a little screen on the bottom for now playing information. Maybe not even a big screen, but just like playback time, a title, maybe not even enough room for the artwork, although that would be cool. But just a little indicator so that you're not having to look at your phone or bring up the UI on the screen, so you could see where you're at during playback and how much longer you have. That'd be one use of that space potentially.
I really love the blank space. And I've been thinking about it just in terms of, that you feel quite comfortable picking it up, knowing that when you are getting your hand in place, you're not going to accidentally press anything.
Mm-hmm.
So I like that there is that element to the design. And I think actually too many more buttons would potentially be a bit of an issue in terms of, does it now look too complex? Is there too much going on? And how much of these buttons are actually going to be used by 90% of the people? And I have a bit of a way of dealing with this. First off, one thing that's kind of missing from the buttons for me, when we went from the original Siri Remote to the next iteration of it, around the menu button, they made like a raised circle. One thing that I thought was quite obvious that Apple didn't do was put this raised element for all of the buttons. So, for example, the back button, the arrow could be raised, so could the TV button, play, pause, mute, and maybe even raised dots around the trackpad, because I don't think people realize that, you've got directional buttons on the outer side as well, and something to kind of make that a little more prominent, but also just make this controller a little more accessible in that regard as well. You and I, we use our Apple TVs day in, day out. Great. For those that don't, though, I know they're going to be looking down at their remote more often than us. So, that's something I would like to see brought into whatever the next iteration is. It's just a weird one because, as I say, they had that raised profile on the menu button to differentiate the buttons, and then really didn't go along with that concept when the next Siri Remote was introduced.
What they did do with the current generation is they indented the back button slightly. So if you put your thumb on the remote, you can kind of orient around the back button and then go from there. But it's way more subtle, I think, than what you're proposing. And it's almost like a process you have to go through. You have to orient and then figure out, okay, from there, where do I go to get what I want? So I agree with you. I think anything feel-wise to make it easier to find the button that you want without having to look away is a great idea. And then for those moments when you do need your eyes, but you're watching in the dark, a feature that we talked about quite often here, that we've seen on other Apple TV remotes and we'd love to see come to Apple's remote, is backlighting for the buttons. Because we love to watch TV and films in the dark, but even in the dark, sometimes you've got to control playback or adjust volume. You don't really want to be fumbling around and do that dance where you lean the remote just the right way where it can catch the TV light. I don't know if you've ever done that, but you don't really want to be doing that in the middle of trying to watch something. So if you could just maybe pick it up and it would recognize that it's being picked up and then light up for you, then you'd be able to quickly find what you need and put it back down. I think that would be an ideal solution.
I love it. It's not something I disagree with. I've really enjoyed backlighting on the third-party remote that came with the Apple TV. If you're accessing a cable subscription through your Apple TV, you'll be au fait with that remote, and it's beautiful in pretty much every way. There is one feature on those remotes, though, that I know you've always been interested in, but hadn't quite dived into. So I'm guessing that's a feature that you want also to come to the next Siri Remote officially from Apple.
Yeah, these remotes do include a guide button for bringing up your live EPG if you're a cable subscriber, or we've talked about Apple implementing their own for streaming, which I think would be awesome. And I don't know if you necessarily need a guide button dedicated on the remote because that space is so precious. But I do wonder if we could configure the TV button to be a guide under certain circumstances, or maybe a press and hold to the TV button or something like that. I think it's the only really configurable button on the remote. And we've got two options right now. You can go to the home screen or you can go to the TV app. And I've got mine set to the home screen so that I can get to the top shelf of app icons. That's how I really like to start my viewing. But I know some people appreciate having the option to go to the TV app. But I think having a guide there would be awesome as well. And maybe even just an option to launch the app of your choice. If you have a particular app, some people use Tracked as their launching point on the Apple TV because it can deep link into all the different apps and it's got your watch history. And there's so many other apps on the Apple TV that some people would think of as their home base. So I think more options for that button, and especially that live guide, would be something that would be a great addition.
In regard to buttons and slight different kind of modifications to the hardware and the software, one thing that I feel like Apple have tried every which way to fix, and is something that even this week, after signing into an Apple TV, I noticed my up next queue get populated with kids shows from Disney, so I know exactly what happened. Someone didn't log back out of my profile and into theirs, and that is, of course, user switching. And I was thinking about it. When you pick up the Siri Remote, especially if you're right-handed like myself, maybe it's a little bit different for left-handed peeps, but I pick up the Siri Remote and instantly my thumb is positioned on the Siri button. It's just naturally there when holding the remote. And I do wonder if this button could have an integrated Touch ID sensor from the iPad. I'm going to say the iPad Air. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and the lower end iPads. I would love to see that integrated into the Siri button. So then when you pick up the remote, it's just automatically going to switch you to your profile because it's going to know your thumbprint. Hopefully that's something that can be done. I think that would just solve a big issue of the Apple TV experience right now, and probably be the best way of being able to get everyone to integrate, because it's just something that really just automatically happens as soon as someone picks up the remote. Very much like it automatically switches profile if you're using the software-based Apple TV remote within Control Center on iOS. So that's one thing I'd love to see. In terms of empty space, you were saying we could reuse some empty space, and I'm wondering if we could reuse some empty space on the side. We've got one button for Siri, and as I say, Touch ID would be lovely as an inclusion there. But it would be nice if we could have another button that could be fully customized. Maybe Apple by default make it go straight to Apple TV Plus, who knows. But to be able to have a button that could be completely customizable, maybe, kind of treat it as a action button and have different states depending on how long you press it, or if you double press a button. That could be really, really handy. Or, if we're not going to go that complex and it's just a one action button, if it's tied in with the user profile, it's kind of perfect, right, for TV viewing.
Yeah, I love this idea as well. I do have a pitch for how they could label it, Sigmund. Just go with me here, okay? Free TV. Imagine it. Oh, just kidding. I love the idea.
Big and blue, yeah.
I'm just kidding. I love the idea of an action button on my Siri Remote. I think there are so many different things that I would love to do with it. I use it all the time on my phone, and I actually put the action button in Control Center on all my other devices, so I could do the same thing on my iPads and Macs and things. And so having it on the Apple TV would be amazing. If they don't want to add another button, I wonder if you could almost do that with the Siri button, because right now you have to press and hold it to activate the voice feature. And I think that's meant to avoid accidental presses, which makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
But if you intentionally press it quickly just once, I wonder if that could be like an action button without having to add another button to the remote.
I love it. Yeah.
Well, I think we've got some really cool ideas for buttons on the Siri Remote. I really love your Touch ID one because I think that would be so helpful, not only for profile switching, but also for authentication for purchases and also for parental controls when you lock down apps with pins for, age restricted content. It's a little frustrating. It's not terrible, but having to enter a pin every time, if you could just authenticate with your thumbprint, that would be really easy as well. But let's talk about features we want to see come to the Siri Remote in the future, because it's not all about the buttons. The buttons are important, but there's a lot that Apple could do in terms of functionality without adding buttons as well. What have you got for us?
Now, this isn't necessarily a problem for me, but I know it's something that is a problem for many. In fact, there was one time, I think, this year where I lost the Siri Remote. Couldn't find it. Went into the sofa somewhere. And especially if you've got a sectional sofa, that's going to happen often. To bring in Find My, but this time with precision finding, would be brilliant. What I found is, whilst the Bluetooth Find My option is very cool in terms of knowing roughly where the Siri Remote is, it's kind of useless to a degree because, well, it's going to be somewhere in the sofa, right? Unless you've got a youngster that's taken it with them and gone to play with it. Who knows? For me, precision finding and Find My would be a brilliant inclusion. And I guess it would mean I get to dump my Nomad case that has an AirTag in there and I could use the AirTag for something else.
I think you're asking for the Siri Remote U2 edition, Sigmund.
Maybe bring the colors as well.
Yeah.
Going back to the first point.
Black and red. Yeah, why not? I'd love that. But yeah, I would love for a UWB chip inside the Apple Remote so that it's easier to find. Because that precision finding, when you use it, it feels like magic. And when you're looking for your TV remote, you feel like you need some magic to to dig it out from those couch cushions.
In terms of other features, I think one of the biggest things, and this is kind of hardware and software, I'm going to imagine, because this was a question I had many, many moons ago, never got an answer to. So just assumed that the microphones aren't good enough to be able to send like voice commands or send messages. And for me, one of the big things I'd like to see as an improvement to what we already have with the Siri Remote is an improved microphone for communication, including sending intercoms, a highly underutilized feature within Apple's home integrations, and being able to talk back to the home cameras that we have placed. We get a notification, we see who's at the doorbell, and, well, that's it. We've got to rush off the sofa. We can't just communicate. So, yeah, a way of being able to kind of deal with that would be great. And lastly, for me at least, the bottom of the Siri Remote, one of the things that I've really loved from the likes of Roku and I'm going to say NVIDIA with their NVIDIA Shield, which I think last was updated in 2019. Still a great box. And that is, I'd like there to be an audio jack or some kind of amplifier within to allow for USB-C or, non-wireless headphones to be easily connected to the Apple TV. And then also with that, having the ability to easily replace those headphones, making private listening more accessible. And also, Apple TV, a great option for hospitals and care homes and all of those other needs for people that are probably doing the most TV viewing out of all of us.
Yeah, this is a really cool idea I hadn't considered before, but it is pretty common on some other TV providers to put this on their remotes, and it seems like something that Apple could implement with the existing USB-C ports if they wanted to. I like this idea a lot. I think this would be really handy for people who aren't necessarily AirPods users or whose devices aren't on the same iCloud account of whatever Apple TV they're using. If they're visiting someone, or like you said, if they're in an unfamiliar place, even like hotels, it would be handy to be able to just quickly plug in a pair of headphones and have private listening. So yeah, this makes a lot of sense. And I think it's something that even with the current setup that Apple has, if they just added that into the USB-C port, they wouldn't have to add a port additionally. My final bit of suggestions for the future of the Siri Remote has to do with power-related features. One struggle that I do have, not very often, because it doesn't happen very often that the TV remote needs to be charged, but it seems like it happens at inconvenient times when it needs to be charged, when I'm not near a USB-C cable to plug it in, or I'm just trying to get something started and don't necessarily want to have to go and track down a charger. And it does warn you, thankfully, but I'm really good at ignoring those warnings and just carrying on. So I think what I need is to have the battery status of my remote in the batteries widget on my iPhone and iPad, like you can do with your AirPods and your Apple Watch and other devices. I think if Apple could, with the magic of iCloud, get that into the batteries widget, that would be a good reminder for me to kind of nag me. Hey, you ignored that reminder on your TV. Could you please plug in your remote so that it doesn't die and you don't get upset when you're trying to watch The Last of Us?
Yeah, I love this. I love the fact that, really, yeah, I'd love it to be in that widget as well, because that's where I go to look for everything. And I wish, Mac and iPads and all of my devices were integrated into that widget. If it wasn't to go in that widget, would a battery icon on top of the Apple TV icon within the Home app suffice?
I think that would help as well. I mean, maybe like piggybacking through the Home app for notifications to remind you to charge, that would be good. And also having the indicator in the Home app. We've talked before, I'd like to see more integrations with the Home app and the Apple TV in terms of their software updates and things like that as well. So I think battery status would be a great addition. And then when it does come time to charge, I would love the ability to charge wirelessly. And I was originally thinking MagSafe, but MagSafe's probably too big for the Siri Remote, but the Apple Watch charger would be perfect for it. And you can use that for your AirPods or your Apple Watch. I'd love to be able to drop my Siri Remote down on the Apple Watch charger I already have on my bedside table and juice it up that way. I could honestly just leave it there while I'm watching, and then it would always be charged up. I wouldn't have to worry about it ever going down again. That'd be really neat, and just a more convenient way to keep it topped off and charged so you don't have to worry about it.
One of the early videos when I had a channel called tvOS Today, which was an Apple TV YouTube channel back in the day, one of the things was, do you remember that Lightning dock for iPhone? And it came in all of those very cool colors. Well, one of my videos was, the Apple TV remote, will it work with the dock? And it did, and it looked wonderful. And it was just a really cool looking way of charging something wired. Because right now, when you charge your Apple TV remote just via a cable, it looks really clunky. Now, of course, Apple got rid of those docks, which I'm still sad about. If we're not going to get MagSafe or anything like that, can we at least get a charging solution that looks nice whilst it's charging, and maybe, acts as a second kind of, right, this is the central point where the remote is, because when it's not used, it's docked. So it's just a little kind of tidbit that I didn't have listed here, but you've got me going.
A bonus edition. I like it a lot. And honestly, if Apple's not interested in making a product like that, that feels like a good opportunity for third parties as well, because it charges via USB-C. You could make a USB-C dock that is form fit for the Siri Remote and color matched. I'd pay a pretty good bit of money for that. I don't know about you, Sigmund.
We may be editing this out, and I may be talking to someone in Shenzhen. So,
well, there you go. For those moments when you do have to plug in your Siri Remote right now because it doesn't charge wirelessly, Apple does have a new offering for you to make it maybe look a little bit cooler than just using the plain white cables that we're used to. This week, Apple expanded the Beats brand into accessory territory even further with a line of Beats branded USB cables. The cables come in 4 woven colors. Those are Bolt Black, Surge Stone, Nitro Navy, and Rapid Red, with options for USB-C to C, USB-A to C, and USB-C to Lightning variants in 1.5 meter and 20 centimeter lengths, starting at $18.99. This is a really interesting move, I think, for Beats, moving the brand into these accessory categories where Apple doesn't necessarily have the room in their brand, maybe for all the colors and different styles. You know, we had the plastic phone cases that came out last fall. Now we've got these USB cables. What do you think about this move for Beats and kind of a different way for Apple to get these accessories out the door?
I think it's cool. I wasn't really grabbed by the cases that were announced with the iPhone this last fall. But yeah, I mean, why leave money on the table, right? From an Apple perspective. That said, a red USB-C cable? Yes, please. So that might be something that I add to my arsenal when it comes to traveling, especially with AirPods Max, just to have a little bit of differentiation there from, other travelers and other people around. So always helpful. Very cool.
Yeah, and I think Beats as a brand has a cachet with maybe a slightly different group of people than the Apple brand. I mean, I think it's a little bit wider in terms of people with Android devices or just Beats headphones might be interested in these sorts of accessories beyond just traditional Apple users. So I think this is cool, and it'll be interesting to see how Apple continues to expand that brand going forward. In app news, the Apple Sports app was updated this week with a new feature for sharing dynamic game cards with others via iMessage and social media. These are very cool. This is expanding on what we've seen with link cards in iMessage in the past and in other apps as well, where you send a URL and Apple expands it out into this rich card with all this other information about the web page and images and things. But now when you send someone a sports game, it's going to have the logos of the teams, the current score. If it's an upcoming game, it'll have the time and all that kind of stuff. So this is a very cool way to share with other people the sports matches that you're interested in and a way to keep up with them dynamically.
And I guess, after the fact, clever and easy and quick way to gloat should your team have beaten your friends. Also in app news this week, Netflix, they're running a test on iOS in Australia and New Zealand to integrate technology from OpenAI into its search feature to allow users to search for content using natural language, including their current mood. Interestingly, the company is also working on the first major redesign to its homepage in over a decade, with plans to roll it out later this year. I think we talked about it last year. They previewed it, and it looked very much like what the old Apple TV app looked like, with the navigation at the top as opposed to the sides. And I think they announced that literally the week that the integration with the sidebar on the Apple TV app got brought to the public. So yeah, interesting. I'm looking forward to that. But yeah, this OpenAI integration is very, very cool. And given Apple's partnership with OpenAI, I can't see why this couldn't come to tvOS overall.
Yeah, it makes me think about the Apple Music feature that Apple added a while back. They were human curated, but you could tell them how you were feeling or what you were doing, and it would bring up a playlist for you. But to be able to do this kind of generatively, I think makes a lot of sense. Seems like a good application for it. Now, Netflix knows so much about us already. I wonder if using it as a mood tracking app is necessarily the best idea. If you don't know what to watch, you don't know what you're in the mood for, you could just tell Netflix, hey, I'm feeling a little anxious right now. Give me something that's not going to put me on the edge of my seat, and they could pull something up for you. So it's an interesting idea, and we'll keep an eye on it as it rolls out to other regions. Meanwhile, Max has joined the trend of streaming services fighting against password sharing, offering users the option to add an extra member who doesn't live with them to their subscriptions for $7.99 a month. The extra member gets their own account with a single profile, which can be transferred away from the original owner's account, and it receives the same plan benefits as the account owner when it comes to video quality and advertising. Now, Sigmund, I can't take advantage of this because, as we talked about before, I'm a bundler. I've got the Disney Plus Max bundle. This is only for people who are billed through Warner Media directly. So if you're paying for Max directly, you can add this on, and it's another way for these streaming services to keep people from sharing outside their homes with their streaming accounts.
Now, in terms of the options, $7.99 is pretty steep, right? Especially if you're on the ad tier, right? Because the ad tier, I think, is $9.99 anyway. And then there are a couple of other tiers, including the top tier, which comes with Dolby Atmos and Dolby Vision exclusively. And that's $24.99 a month. I think that's the correct pricing as of now. So an extra $7.99 a month for that is pretty good. Whilst, say, the ad-supported plan, you probably don't see the value there as much for those really forking out the big bucks for this service, and with good reason. $7.99 a month for that extra profile is a pretty good deal.
Yeah, it's interesting that it's not tiered based on what version of the service you have, because, like you said, it's a much better value for the people who are paying the higher tier. I mean, I guess if you have two households, you add up the higher tier plus the extra member, then you split that by two. I mean, if you're dividing it up, that's actually really not bad at all. But it's just a continuation in this trend. If you're going to be sharing your account with someone outside your home, seems like you're going to be paying $7 to $8 a month extra, then the streaming services will give you their blessing.
Yeah, I mean, it's either that or, you go down the route of tail scale, which we've mentioned before, or you do what I did this past week. My router actually has a VPN setting, and I've set up a personal VPN so I can VPN into my home network from wherever I am on any device. And that solves things, especially for parents and for, families that have a more complicated setup without having to pay the extra money.
I think this highlights a key difference in our personalities, Sigmund, because my solution to things is to throw money at the problem, and your solution is to figure out a technical workaround, and that just tells you everything you need to know about each of us.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, really, really simple, and I'm sure we'll delve into that subject again very, very soon. Let's talk about some Apple original news this week. A ton of news this week, Devon. I wasn't able to catch up with it all, so I'm really, really excited for some of the details here. And well, we're going to kick things off with news of a new Apple original drama series called Smoke, premiering just in a couple of months' time.
Yeah, Smoke's coming to Apple TV Plus Friday, June 27th. This is the series that reunites the team behind Blackbird, including creator Dennis Lehane, executive producer Richard Plepler, and lead star and executive producer Taron Egerton. Inspired by Truth Media's Firebug podcast, it follows a troubled detective, who's played by Journey Smollett, and an enigmatic arson investigator played by Taron Egerton as they pursue the trails of two serial arsonists. The cast also features Ray Spall and Tada Guma Amaha-Wine, Hannah Emily Anderson, Anna Chomsky, Dina Porter, Greg Kinnear, and John Leguizamo, and a first look at the show is linked in the show notes. I'm excited that we're going to be able to see this one in a couple months. Of course, Blackbird was a big hit for Apple TV Plus, so big in fact that they immediately ordered a totally separate series from the same team, just said, you guys get back together and see what you come up with. And this looks like an intriguing series. The inclusion of Journey Smollett has me excited. She's someone I've been a fan of for years and years, since I was a kid, I think. She's been around and doing lots of great stuff. So this looks like an exciting one. And really, now I'm just waiting for the trailer for this one.
Yeah, and I would almost say, if you're in the mood for this and you may have missed it, Blackbird, an incredible, incredible series. And if you've seen it, you understand why Apple okay, what's the next project? Because that was outstanding and an Emmy Award winner. July 11th also see the global debut of a 6-part documentary series called The Wild Ones. It follows a trial of wildlife experts as they embark on high-stakes expeditions across the globe to track and protect the planet's endangered species. The team are going to visit 6 countries, those being Malaysia, Mongolia, Armenia, Indonesia, Canada, and Gabon, and the show deploys a next-generation camera technology to capture rare and sometimes first-ever footage of elusive species such as the Malayan tiger, the Gobi bear, the Caucasian leopard, the Javan rhino, North Atlantic right whale, and the Western lowland gorilla. Of course, a first look photo is linked in the show notes. Really fascinating stuff, and I'm really looking forward to The Wild Ones. Again, July 11th, streaming globally on Apple TV+.
Now, we don't have a date for this one just yet, but I think this one's going to be exciting for you, Sigmund, based on your experience at Sundance this year. Apple's acquired the rights to Ryan White's documentary Come See Me in the Good Light, the winner of this year's Sundance Festival Favorite Award. The film is described as a love story centered on poets Andrea Gibson and Megan Falley, who face an incurable cancer diagnosis with joy, wit, and an unshakable partnership. Through laughter and unwavering love, they transform pain into purpose and mortality into a moving celebration of resilience. The film is produced by Ryan White, Jessica Hargrove, Tig Notaro, and Steph Willen. It features an original song performed by Sarah Bareilles and Brandi Carlile that the two wrote with one of the film's subjects, Andrea Gibson, and it will make its streaming premiere on Apple TV Plus this fall. No solid date yet, but cool to know that this one is coming and that Apple picked it up from the festival.
Yeah, and I would say for anyone interested, check out some of the Sundance interviews from earlier this year. Some really insightful conversation there, and this was one that flew under my radar when going through all of my different picks and what I was excited for. So this is completely brand new to me. Really looking forward to that. In the kids and family department, Apple have announced Lulu is a Rhinoceros, a new empowering pop musical family event premiering May 30th on Apple TV Plus. Is based on the beloved children's book of the same name by father-daughter duo Jason and Alison Flom. And the special follows Lulu the Rhinoceros on a journey towards kindness, acceptance, and an embracing of her true self. It will feature original songs by Leyland and a voice cast full of incredible voice actors, and we'll leave a link to a first look at the special in our show notes. But let me just say, this past weekend, spending some time with my goddaughter and watching lots and lots of kids shows, this actually raised my eyebrows. I'm really looking forward to checking this out, and yeah, I guess between you and I, we get to watch a lot of kids and family content, more than when we started this show.
Yes, and I think the ratio is only going to continue to go up, Sigmund. There's some really good kids and family content out there, especially on Apple TV Plus, and I look forward to checking this one out. In production news, this week Apple shared a first look at Margot's Got Money Troubles, which is currently filming. The series centers on a young expecting mother who borrows principles from her dad's wrestling career to make a living on OnlyFans. It stars Elle Fanning, Michelle Pfeiffer, Nick Offerman, and a host of others. It will debut in 2026 on Apple TV+. If you hear Nick Offerman as a wrestling dad and you think, what does that look like? Check out these pictures. It's pretty impressive and gives a pretty cool look at what to expect from the show. Our other big production news this week is that filming for Your Friends and Neighbors Season 2 has begun, with new series regular James Marsden in tow. So kind of a combo of filming and casting news this week.
In terms of development, Apple have ordered a 7-episode comedy series called Prodigies from creator, writer, and director Will Sharp. Produced by Sister, the show stars Sharp and Emmy and Golden Globe winner Ayo Idabiri as Dee Dee and Ren, two ex-child prodigies who have been together since they were children. Now, in their early 30s, they're starting to question whether their very ordinary existence is living up to the extraordinary promise of their childhood, and inevitably, they find themselves asking the same questions of their relationship as individual hopes and needs feed into and conflict with their shared lives. The series challenges the fallacy at the heart of romantic storytelling, that the tale is over when the heroes get together in life, and this is something that I don't know, it really, just the concept of this pulls on my heartstrings, because I'm one of those people as a young child who would cry themselves to sleep not knowing the meaning of life. Thankfully that's stopped now, because that would have led to a complete nervous breakdown. But yeah, I'm really looking forward to this one.
Yeah, this sounds like a really cool premise, and the team behind it, I think this is going to be great, and a great pickup for Apple TV Plus. One other bit of casting news this week. This one has me very excited. Joel Kinnaman himself of For All Mankind fame and Corey Stoll, known for Billions and Ant-Man, will join Elizabeth Moss, Kerry Washington, and Kate Mara in the limited series adaptation of Araminta Hall's novel Imperfect Women. Written by physical creator Annie Weissman, the psychological thriller follows three women whose decades-long friendship is shattered by a crime. As the investigation unravels, so does the truth about how even the closest relationships can change over time. We've been hearing about this with the main cast. Of course, Elizabeth Moss just killing it on Handmaid's Tale right now as that show's finishing up. I'm excited to see her back on Apple TV+. But to have Joe Kinnaman and Corey Stoll in the mix as well, this just sounds like an awesome cast for a series being led by Annie Weissman. Yeah, just all these names have me super pumped for this. When I read this news, I couldn't wait to share it on the show this week.
In other news, Jason Momoa was featured in an interview with GQ this week, centered on his upcoming Apple Originals series, Chief of War, that also included some first look photos from the show, which we'll link in the show notes, and something completely different. Bespoke keyboard studio Atomic is bringing our dreams of a Severance-style computer to life, at least the keyboard side of it, although we'll get into that in a moment. The MDR Dasher keyboard is an upcoming USB-C mechanical keyboard created to emulate the ones used by Mark S. and his team on the show. The keyboard actually made its debut last week at a keyboard meetup in Shanghai. Details have yet to be finalized about the product and production, but you can sign up to receive more information as well as register your interest and fill out a form which has many questions. We'll link that in the show notes, but one of the questions was, how much would you want a display to match that keyboard? Right, it will cost, but we could possibly do it. And also, for me personally, I was quite happy that this option was there. Do you want Bluetooth as well as USB-C? Because we can kind of make that happen as well, given the size of the keyboard itself. And of course, switches for people that are really into having a particular click as they type. But for me, this is going to be an Apple TV accessory. As long as that trackball can work like a Siri Remote, and can actually work with navigation. Oh, yes. Now, they've proposed that early bird pricing is going to be around the $400 mark. So this, I'm going to have to try and wrangle as some kind of business expense. But yeah, this, whilst not officially licensed in any way, I'm very interested and excited for this.
Yeah, this looks awesome, and I love the extra details you got from filling out the form. I didn't fill out the form, so it's cool to know that they're still kind of working out exactly what it's going to be with feedback from the user base. This just feels like every Severance fan's dream. I can't wait to see it out in the real world and hear your thoughts on it when you do get it hooked up to your Apple TV. Speaking of Severance, the series hit a new weekly high of 876 million minutes watched the week of its season 2 finale, coming in at number 4 on Nielsen's streaming original series chart and number 10 on the overall streaming chart, including films and non-original series, which is quite an impressive achievement. Nielsen reports that across its second season, Severance racked up a total of 6.4 billion minutes watched, which is a very big number. A lot of people watching Severance. Very well-deserved success. The fact that it's doing so well on the Nielsen charts, I think, is very encouraging for not only the series and its future, but also Apple TV Plus as a whole.
Yeah, and it's not the only Apple original series doing gangbusters, maybe to a lesser degree, but Your Friends and Neighbours, a show that we've been highly anticipating and I've been gripped to with every episode past the premiere, is in at number 9 on the Luminate streaming TV charts for the week of its debut, with 402 million minutes watched. And I've got a funny feeling that success is continuing because it's currently residing at number 1 in the Apple TV Plus charts, ahead of Severance, Ted Lasso, and all of the big hitters on the service.
Yeah, that's really incredible. I saw it at the top of the chart too, and I thought, wow, it's beating Severance. That's pretty good. Even with Severance over, I have to imagine a lot of people are still finishing up season 2 or maybe even rewatching season 1 in the wake of it all. That's very cool to see. Your Friends and Neighbors, which a lot of people thought of as really Apple's next big mainstream play after Severance doing so well. We haven't had a ton of awards news lately. Award season pretty well winding down for the year. We've had a bit of a lull, but this week the Peabody Awards nominations were announced, and an Apple original was on the list. In the documentary category, The Last of the Sea Women was nominated, which is awesome to see. And the winners for the Peabody Awards will be announced May 1st, so congratulations to them and all the nominees, and of course, best of luck.
Well, that's a lot to look forward to and a lot to reminisce on, but this week's Apple TV releases keep coming, and today we see new episodes of Government Cheese, episode 5, my highlight of the series, alongside the studio entitled The Pediatric Oncologist. And I gotta say, this is also my favourite episode of this show, The Studio. I felt incredibly seen and admittedly once made as much as a tit of myself as Mark Remick in this episode, as he kind of navigates a date night in very unfamiliar territory. This is cringe-inducing brilliance, and yes, I found myself nodding along to Matt throughout. Very, very funny. Have you had a chance to see this episode just yet?
I did watch this one knowing how much you loved it, and I have to say it lived up to the hype 100%, Sigmund. This is the best episode of the series I've seen so far, and I had to watch it with squinted eyes because, like you said, it's just some of the decisions that are made are so poor, but it's so entertaining, and yeah, just a great show and a great kind of diversion for the series midway through into a different light, but one that fits very well with what Seth Rogen and team are doing. Great series on Apple TV Plus. This isn't an Apple TV release, but it's something you can do, of course, on Apple TV. We're talking about fitness here. Of course, Apple Fitness Plus is available on your Apple TV. But regardless of how you exercise, we encourage you this Thursday to celebrate Global Close Your Rings Day. This is a celebration of 10 years of activity rings on Apple Watch. It's an opportunity to earn a limited edition award and iMessage stickers for closing your rings. And you can also pick up a special enamel pin inspired by the award at Apple stores worldwide. So it's not just digital. You can also get this award physically, which is a cool addition that we don't normally see with these kinds of challenges.
On Friday, we see the premiere of Wondler Season 2, the brilliant animation for kids and family. Very, very much looking forward to that. Alongside a new episode of Your Friends and Neighbours, and the finale to Dope Thief, which I feel almost both series have a little in common there. Cannot wait to talk about Dope Thief next week on the show, following its finale. And of course, on Friday, we see Friday Night Baseball. This time, Boston Red Sox at Cleveland Guardians at 7 p.m. Eastern, followed by the Texas Rangers at San Francisco Giants at 10 p.m. Eastern. And on Saturday, we see not only the MLS Game Day on MOS Season Pass, but Sunday sees the return of Sunday Night Soccer, this time LAFC versus St. Louis. A pretty big matchup, and one that I'll be looking forward to. Monday, of course, sees a new episode of Big Time, a podcast available to everyone, but Apple TV Plus subscribers get 1 week ahead. And I don't know if you've been following this, but the stories have just been wild throughout.
Yeah, this most recent episode that's coming out for everyone on Monday, I listened to it last week through my Apple TV Plus subscription. It's about bee thievery, which is not an area of crime I'd ever thought about, but yeah, wild world, very interesting stories. Not super sensational, just interesting stories about things that happened and how those stories turned out. For extras this week, we've got a press release from Apple about meeting 4 emerging filmmakers bending cultural and creative lines with iPhone 16 Pro Max. These are creators out of India, up and coming. Very cool highlight of what they're doing with the iPhone 16 Pro Max. There's a new TV app collection in celebration of Earth Day called The Future Is Up to Us. You can check that out in the TV app. Seth Rogen did an interview with Zane Lowe, 2 people who just make so much sense that they would get together and have a great conversation, so check out that interview as well. There's a new Apple Maps guide called A Day Off in LA with David Oyelowo, and a couple of extras on the Apple TV YouTube channel, including Your Friends and Neighbors Friendly Fire, and a first look at next week's premiere of Karim.
That's everything that is happening this week. Let's rewind a little bit to last week. We saw the season finale of Berlin ER, and well, we're about to recap with some heavy spoiler talk. So if you've yet to watch Berlin ER, get to it and skip this chapter until you're ready in 3, 2, 1. After her private life falls apart, a young doctor seeking a fresh start takes over the emergency room in Berlin's toughest, most chaotic hospital, battling staff resistance and a rundown system. She must unite her maverick team to save lives.
Das ist unsere neue Chefärztin, Dr. Susanna Parker.
Guten Tag.
Unser Krankenhaus hat 618 Betten und rund 30.000 stationäre Patienten im Jahr.
Mach es raus!
300 Ärzte, 600 PflegerInnen.
Ja, wir sind zu wenige, immer.
Wenn es brennt, hat die Rettungsstelle 250 Patienten. Wenn es richtig brennt, über 300. Sie kriegen das hier alles auf die Reihe.
Ist das die neue Chefin?
Ja, Ben, das ist seine neue Chefin.
Wenn ich einmal ganz kurz Ihre Aufmerksamkeit haben dürfte, bitte.
This is co-created by former emergency room physician Samuel Jefferson and Victor Javolensky, starring Haley Louise Jones and Slavko Popovic. Devon, this is one that, I'll be honest, beyond the premiere episodes, I didn't keep up with, mainly because I, in real life, am spending a little too much time in hospitals at the moment, so need, to find the time and the headspace to get into this one. But before we get into a plot summary of the season, was this one that you enjoyed?
I did. Yeah, I enjoyed it quite a bit. I could totally understand why, for someone who maybe works in a hospital or spends a lot of time in a hospital, maybe that's not how you want to spend your time on the couch as well. But as someone who doesn't have a ton of insight into the medical field, doesn't have a ton of experience with it, I found this to be a really intriguing look and one that I enjoyed quite a bit, though I have to admit it did stress me out at moments because it's very, very high octane.
Okay, well, through the high-octane first season of Berlin ER, what happened and where are we at?
Well, it starts with Dr. Susanna Parker, who moves from Munich to Berlin to take over the Crank, the city's infamously hectic and run-down emergency room. She works to reform the ER, pushing against resistance from staff to make it run more efficiently and safely. But along the way, she has to navigate staff issues, including the dissatisfaction of surgeon Adina Ertan and the impact of Dr. Ben Weber's secret opioid addiction that plays out throughout the season. She also has to contend with her own mistakes, both past and present, as her family and patients suffer from some of her decisions. And to top it all off, the ER has been infiltrated by a fraud, Dr. Dominic Cohn, who pretends to be a competent doctor while secretly looking up treatment methods online before consultations.
Wow.
It all comes to a head when a nearby building collapses, and the victims are all directed to the crank, forcing Dr. Parker and her staff to put their own issues aside for the sake of their patients. Like I said, high octane, Sigmund. There's a lot happening here.
Ooh. And just through that explanation, I feel like I am going to find time and make time for this series. Lots happening here. Interpersonal drama, traumatic injuries, intrigue, and more. To start us off, though, what were your overall thoughts on the series? I know you said you enjoyed it, but did it give you any kind of insight into how the system works in Europe compared to the States? Or was there something that you learned from this that wasn't necessarily shown in the depiction of, the ambulance system in Mexico with our previous medical drama?
Yeah, I will say this is definitely a different perspective into the medical world. Midnight Family was a little closer to home because it took place in Mexico, a country that I have been to. And while I've not had a ton of experience with their medical system, I've heard stories and things like that. Whereas Germany's medical system, the European model, is one that I'm completely unfamiliar with. And so there were aspects of it, especially when it comes to like billing and how things are handled in that way, that I just completely didn't understand. And there's some storylines that come up towards the end of the season about privatization and how all that works. So that was totally new to me. But I feel like I learned a lot from it and got a different perspective from, of course, the usual U.S. medical drama. I got maybe what it's like for Europeans to watch like Grey's Anatomy and see how messed up our system is. It's like, there's another way of doing things. So I thought that was cool. It's all obviously very dramatic and high stakes with lots of yelling and running, as you've come to expect. But there were also some interesting medical cases sprinkled in. There was some nice character development, not only with Zana and Ben, but more side characters as well. A great ensemble cast, many of whom I didn't even get to mention in the summary because there's just so much happening on this show. I'll say it had some interesting stylistic choices at the beginning, especially when it came to Ben's perspective with his drug abuse struggles. And there was also some cool drone videography in the first couple episodes that I thought was neat. And unfortunately, it sort of veered towards the center of the medical drama genre as time went on, losing some of that uniqueness. It kind of just got caught up in, of course, the drama of it all, and the interpersonal and the cases. So some of that stylistic stuff that I enjoyed a lot at the beginning didn't seem to persist, but the music did. The German pop music throughout the series and hip hop as well, that stuff was great. So yeah, there was some unique stylistic stuff, especially at the beginning, but I enjoyed it quite a bit.
Lots of uses of insight, no doubt, finding those German tracks. One thing that is unique about the show, at least on such a global service, is its German setting and the language. So beyond the music, how do you think that this set itself apart?
I'm going to be honest, I did a mix of subtitles and dubbing throughout the series, kind of depending on energy levels and what I was kind of ready to handle at the time. And it made me really appreciate the global streaming world that we live in now, where watching a German medical drama with subtitles or dubbing is totally normal, right? It's just a part of how we watch TV. Whereas maybe 5 or 10 years ago, a German medical drama on a global streaming service, I don't think it would have had a whole lot of spread or chance to really get out there. But now, I mean, we're just so used to it. And the options are so good that it's just kind of a non-issue, which I appreciate. So while the German aspect of it, I think culturally did have a big impact on my understanding of the medical world there and how all that works, I didn't find the language aspect to be too much of a concern because I could do either way. And, having watched it both ways, I'll say the dubbing and the subtitles, both very well done, high quality. You could understand the show either way. And so it was cool to get a mix of that. But I'll say that to me, I really came away with, other than the cultural aspect of just how the whole medical system works, is that we are just in a global streaming world now. And it's just a non-issue to watch content in other languages and see performers you've never heard of or seen before. And I really appreciated that.
Well, I think, narratively speaking, we should go into the story of this and the impact the story had on you. Because when you and Jonathan highlighted the premiere of the series, you said that you were curious to find out how the show balanced medical cases with interpersonal drama. So how did you find that balance to be? And was it the correct balance?
It was stressful, Sigmund. I may have said that a few times throughout this recap, but the series really it's just nonstop, but it did a great job, I think, of giving viewers a perspective of what it's like to be in that hectic, high-stress environment like that all the time. These doctors pretty much live in the ER, right? They'll go home and sleep, maybe go party on a Friday night or whatever, but then they're right back Saturday morning. It never ends for them. These people need them, and the system's overrun, and you really get that feeling throughout watching the show. I'll say it never felt like the show leaned too much into melodrama or got bogged down in the plot with unnecessary patient side plots. I feel like it was very well balanced. When there were particular highlights on individual cases, it was for a specific reason, even if it kind of took a little bit of time for it to come back around. And you just got a vibe for these doctors, and, they care about their patients, but they're also exhausted. And the show kind of exhausts you in that way as you're watching it, to give you that feeling of just when you're in this situation where there's not enough support, there's not enough money, there's not enough staff, and there's just people who are constantly needing you to literally save their lives. It takes a toll. And so you really get that view.
Absolutely.
And I appreciated that perspective. I feel like I understood it in a way that I hadn't before. I think we all understand it on an intellectual level, but really seeing it played out on screen, it gave you a good sense of that. And, it also gave you some sympathy for the patients as well. Many of them, just people who come in and off the street hurt. Some of them maybe a little more complex characters who, you get annoyed with, or you're like, I don't know if I would have put up with that person. But yeah, I think really what it did such an effective job of was giving you that doctor's perspective of just wanting to help, but being broken down by the system over time and trying to withstand that.
And I would say, if you are in hospital, always ask the person that's caring for you how they're doing, right? And kind of bring that humanistic approach to it. Of course, you always, you have anxiety running through you, and no matter what, but, always make sure that the people that are caring for you are asked about as well. I find that just offers a really important balance to the situation as a whole. Now, you mentioned character development as one of the series' strengths, and you said, the highlights that we've played out, we're missing so much. So this is the point in the conversation where I get to ask, was there a particular character and a particular part of their development that really stood out, despite, of course, the wealth of different characters and scenarios?
Yeah, it's tough because they're such a great cast of characters, and so many of them come so far over these 10 episodes. And of course, you've got Susanna with her leadership of learning to navigate the ER. She has to contend with her past. She makes at least one horrible mistake along the way in her work that we get to see play out and see her contend with. But ultimately, she comes into her own as the head of ER and learns to find fulfillment in the important work that she's doing. When we meet her, she's got kind of this like blank stare. You could tell that she's just not happy, and there's hints that she's been through something, pretty difficult in her personal life, and we get to see that, how that plays out throughout the season. But it's cool to see her become that leader that she wants to be and stick it out. And, at the beginning of the series, she etches her name into the board as the head of the ER, and we get to see that resilience really play out throughout the season, which I think is great. Ben, we get to see him struggle with addiction and just rules in general. He's not great with authority. You get that very quickly as you meet him, even from the very first scene of the series. He wants to help those less fortunate, but he can't even really manage himself. And as he spirals, his ability to help others breaks down as well. He does some really questionable things, even as he endears Zana before his problems force themselves into the light. And so his journey is almost from like top to bottom, and we really see him just come crashing down. And what do you do when you've hit rock bottom, but you still have this desire to help people? And that's a really interesting and I think worthwhile journey to go on with him. I mentioned Dr. Amina Ertan briefly in our summary. She hates her job. She hates everyone she works with, and she's not afraid to tell you that. And she spends the entire season trying to escape, and she has to work through her rage and her obligations as a doctor. There's a really interesting storyline where she's forced to treat a police officer who beat her brother and put him into a coma. And so she has to kind of come face to face with her own responsibility as a doctor. But I think a theme with the doctors this season, she comes out the other side with an appreciation for her work that she didn't have before. And I think that's a really important aspect of the season for a lot of these medical workers is they start off just so beaten down and broken, but through some of the changes that Zana makes and through the work that they're doing, they're actually able to come back around and appreciate what they're doing. Finally, one character that I really wanted to shout out, she didn't make it into the summary because it was just too much happening, is Olivia, the EMS worker. She rides around with an old man named Olaf, who is seasoned and puts her down for her ideas about the world. I mean, it's almost like a Midnight Family situation, except for it's just these two strangers getting to know each other and work together. And she's got her new ideas of how she wants to treat people and what she thinks of as fair. And he's been through it all, and he's very gruff and just, to the point. And so they have some interesting conversations and listen to some great music as well. She ultimately learns to stand up for herself and prove herself competent in her own right. And she also plays a big part in Amina's journey. So I think she was a great addition. I love that they had the EMS element of the show as well. In addition, that's an important part of the emergency room, right? These people who are going out and dealing with whatever situation they find themselves in. You have no idea what you're going into. Could be violent, could be extremely dangerous, but they do the good work, and I think that was a great element to see, and I loved Olivia's growth and just the trajectory that they put her character on.
Very, very cool. Again, really looking forward to catching up with this when the time comes and is right. But I got to ask, as we do with all of these Apple original shows after its first season, do we see a renewal? And I guess what could be explored, because I think especially in Europe, when it comes to the health service, there's this constant fear of privatization and going more down the American system that everyone is petrified of over here, from a system that is, free and available to all. So is this, along with, all of the other medical dramas that have stayed the test of time, what is the future for Berlin ER?
I think the show definitely does have a potential future. This is a genre that can go on for a very long time if you'll let it. There's lots of different plot lines that they could pick up. The biggest change would be, of course, the privatization of the hospital, which would be very interesting, especially for me as someone who doesn't totally understand what those implications would be. I've never known anything other than private hospitals. So I got the public glimpse, but to see what that process would look like, that would be interesting. And how Susanna would handle that with all the work she's done to get it in good shape, and then the government comes in and sells it. I think that would be really interesting. You could also pick up on Ben's addiction treatment, his relationship with Zana. Love to see him, in a better place and see them develop. Amina's brother, who I mentioned, was in a very precarious medical situation at the end of the season. I'd like to see what happens with him. And then Dom's malpractice. I mentioned this doctor who was just bumbling around and literally costing people their lives and health because he just didn't know what he was doing. And what they did with his storyline was really interesting. I don't know if this was supposed to be a redemption arc for him or if this was just kind of getting his just desserts, but he tries to help out with this building that's collapsing and ends up passing away in the rescue effort. And so there's no real discovery of what he was doing. There's no real fallout from that, but I have to imagine if there's a second season, someone has to point out, hey, this guy didn't know what he was doing, and it impacted my family in a really terrible way. So I want to see more of how that played out and kind of how he got to where he was. But that was a storyline that I think would be great to be picked up. That said, with all those things they could pick up, I have to say, we've been talking about finales. We've been talking about how we would like these season finales to be handled. And I feel like they really nailed it in terms of wrapping up things in a satisfying way. So if the series doesn't continue, I can still say confidently it's worth watching because it tells a good story and ends in a way that if they don't pick up those storylines, it's not a disappointment. It's just, you can enjoy it for what it was. So I'd love to see it carry on. I hope we hear some renewal news soon. But even if we don't, it's still worth a watch and a great season of television from Berlin ER.
Very, very cool. Berlin ER streaming its first season, hopefully first of many, on Apple TV Plus across the globe. Now for some TV app highlights, Devon, and very film heavy, but we do start on Thursday with the season 5 premiere of You on Netflix. I'm not sure if this is a show that you've checked out previously, but it's a wild concept. And the final season sees Joe, the serial killer's story, come full circle back to New York as a family conflict threatens his glamorous marriage and an alluring new crush revives his darkest impulses. So definitely very, very campy, controversial in some ways as well, but a lot of fun. On Friday, we see a big, big day for films in the TV app, mainly from Premium VOD. Freaky Tales is about an NBA star, a corrupt cop, a female rap duo, teenage punks, neo-Nazis, and a debt collector as they embark on a collision course in 1987 Oakland, California. And it looks really wild. It looks quite gritty as well. And it stars Pedro Pascal, who's just everywhere at the moment. Neighborhood Watch is my next pick, again on PVOD, starring Jack Quaid, who has been in so many interesting films this year, alongside Jeffrey Dean Morgan. And it's a crime thriller about a young man who, believing he witnessed an abduction, turns to his next door neighbor, a retired security guard, to help him find the missing woman. And yeah, trailer just looks out of this world, and one that is very different from the first pick. And we're going to do that again because Winter, Spring, Summer or Fall is also coming to PVOD. This is a romantic kind of coming of age story about Remy and Barnes, two very different teenagers who meet by chance in the winter of their senior year, then spend 4 days together over the course of a year that will change their lives forever. It stars Jenna Ortega and a promising young actor called Percy Hines White. One thing I would say on this case, don't watch the trailer, which gives away way too much, but definitely one that's going to be a nice, easy view for people. And I don't know if it's based on a novel, but it definitely has that kind of young adult fiction, romance novel kind of vibe to it. On Tuesday, though, we see Death of a Unicorn come to PVOD. This is also starring Jenna Ortega, but in a very, very different film, alongside Paul Rudd, Will Poulter, who's amazing in this, Richard E. Grant, Anthony Carrigan from Barry, and Tia Leone, alongside Sunita Mani. And it's a recent A24 film, which is a eat the rich fantasy comedy about a weekend retreat with deadly consequences when a father and daughter accidentally hit and kill a unicorn whilst en route to find his billionaire boss, who then seeks to exploit the creature's miraculous curative properties. And whilst this is a really interesting film concept-wise, I'm not sure if it really hit the mark for me personally. But other people seem to have really loved it. So definitely one to add to your watch list. Alongside The Friend, this is also on PVOD, an adaptation of Sigrid Nunez's best-selling 2018 novel about a woman dealing with her friend's suicide. It stars Bill Murray alongside Naomi Watts as Iris, a New York City writer who finds her comfortable, solitary life thrown into disarray after her closest friend and mentor bequeaths her a Great Dane named Apollo. This looks so good, and whilst maybe a little bit somber, who can't beat a story about a Great Dane and a lady kind of being brought together? And I just think it's going to be fantastic. Really looking forward to that. Two more. Sacramento follows Ricky, an energetic and free-spirited young man with a Peter Pan complex who convinces his longtime friend Glenn to hit pause on his blissful domestic life and embark on an impromptu road trip across California. It's directed, written and starring Michael Angararo alongside Michael Cera, Maya Erskine and Kristen Stewart. And for those that really loved A Real Pain, which of course won an Academy Award, I gave it rave reviews when I saw it early at London Film Festival. This one I think is going to be for you. And finally, there's been a couple of anxiety-inducing Apple-related films releasing recently. Last week saw I Hostage on Netflix, which is based on a true story situation in an Amsterdam Apple store. But this week sees the release of Drop on PVOD, a film that recently had its theatrical run, and it's a film whose premise is based solely on Apple's AirDrop feature before, of course, limitations were set last year, meaning you couldn't be the victim of unsolicited messages and files being sent to you because of that 10-minute to everyone time limit. In this film, however, Violet is a widowed mother who goes to an upscale restaurant to meet Henry, her charming and handsome date. However, her pleasant evening soon turns into a living nightmare when she receives phone messages from a mysterious hooded figure who threatens to kill her young son and sister unless she kills Henry. It stars Megan Fahey in the lead role. It's directed by Happy Death Day director Christopher Landon, so you kind of get an idea of what comedy and horror you can expect from this. And amongst its many producers of this project is Michael Bay. So I'm really looking forward to checking this one out also. So a great variety of films and TV to add to your watch list and maybe check out. I think every one of them offers something very different.
Yeah, I think of these, I would probably do a double feature of Drop and then winter, spring, summer, or fall to relax after that high stakes. But yeah, there's a lot of great films coming out this week. Awesome selection and a great list that you put together here, Sigmund. You ready to do our up next picks?
Absolutely. I think your up next pick this week is a previous up next pick of mine.
I know we mentioned it before when it came out. I wasn't sure if it was a TV Up highlight or an up next pick, but it's so good I have to mention it again, Sigmund, because anyone who's missed it, I highly recommend checking it out, and that is Adolescence on Netflix. I've heard really good things about it, but I've actually got to watch the first two myself now, and I am completely hooked by this series. For those who don't know, it's a crime drama series from creators Jack Thorne and Stephen Graham, who also plays the main character's father, and Brad Pitt's Plan B Entertainment. It follows the investigation into a violent murder of a classmate committed by a 13-year-old boy, and it sheds light on issues of young male rage and the influence of online personalities sharing sexist views to young audiences. Stars newcomer Owen Cooper as Jamie, the boy being investigated, Stephen Graham as his father Eddie, Ashley Walters and Faye Marseille as the police investigators, and a host of others. It consists of 4 one-hour episodes directed by Philip Barantini, shot as single takes in real time by cinematographer Matthew Lewis. I can't even imagine the process behind this series. I mean, it plays out as like very elaborate plays, but there's changes in sets, there's cars moving. I mean, the timing of getting everything just right. It's an incredible feat of TV making and incredible accomplishment by this team, not only behind the scenes, but the actors on screen as well, to put this together. This is another instance where I think the cultural difference really strikes me, seeing the legal proceedings in the UK compared to what I'm used to in the US. It's a very interesting inside look at what that's like. It's just 4 hours in the lives of these people, right? It's in real time, so it's not cheating to cover these huge swaths of their lives, but these are 4 very pivotal moments in their lives that change them forever. And the performances are heartbreaking. It's very intense and dark, and I think it's one that's going to stick with me. I'm going to be thinking about this one for a long time, but it's just impressive on so many levels. The subject that they're taking on, the way that they're doing it, so impressive. And of course, it's now streaming on Netflix with discussions for a second season currently ongoing. I hope Adolescence lives on, that they can continue to pull off this format, because it really is impressive and powerful.
Very cool. Well, I'm kind of stepping away and stepping outside, touching grass for a little bit and going to the cinema with our up next pick this week. And that is Sinners in theatres and IMAX currently. I wanted to check this out last week. Unfortunately, lots in the way where I wasn't able to, but I'm planning to see this weekend. And it's a film that's from director and writer Ryan Coogler, that sees twin brothers trying to leave their troubled lives behind and return to their Mississippi hometown to start again, only to discover that an even greater evil is waiting to welcome them back. This is described as a Jim Crow era Deep South chilling gonzo horror. It stars Michael B. Jordan, Dickinson's Haley Steinfeld, Jack O'Connell, Omar Benson Miller, and more. I've heard so many different things from so many people, yet I know very, very little about this. I've heard everything from horror influences to musical influences, but I've also heard that this film is heavily influenced by Robert Rodriguez's The Faculty and From Dusk Till Dawn, which definitely pricked my ears. And I'll be honest, I've heard great things, and I've heard it's a good reason to get out to the cinema. So I'm seeing this again, BFI IMAX this weekend on glorious 70mm print. Another good reason to get to the cinemas if you are at one of those special locations that have that access. Of course, any other cinema goers around the globe, I highly, highly recommend going out, supporting your local cinema and the communal cinematic experience, before it's gone forever. So Sinners is my up next pick. Lots to stream, lots to catch up on, and you got to get out, even if it is to get into a dark room and laugh along and shriek along with other people. Is the best experience.
Yeah, you can go touch some grass, close your rings on the way to the theater, get your enamel pin at the Apple Store, and then go watch Sinners. That sounds like a really great day, actually, and a great recommendation. Well, that's all from us this week. Thanks so much for listening. We appreciate everyone tuning in every week. And of course, we'd love to hear from you. You can contact us on social media via the links in the show notes. You can send us a voice message via email or iMessage to magic@macstories.net. And we have a new contact form that we'll link in the show notes. This is a new contact form for all of the shows from Mac Stories. You can go there, select Magic Rays of Light, send us what you're thinking, and we would love to hear your feedback on the show.
We'll be back next week with the premiere of Carême, a look back at Dope Thief, and more. So until then, stay safe, watch some Apple TV, play some Apple Arcade, and have a great week.